The spotlight felt warm against Victor Ashford's skin as he stood center stage, his hand raised in acknowledgement of the thunderous applause washing over him. 2,000 people were on their feet, their hands coming together in a rhythm that echoed through the grand concert hall. This was what he lived for. This moment. This validation. He bowed once more, his tailored suit catching the stage lights perfectly. At 42 years old, Victor had reached heights most musicians only dreamed about. His name appeared on concert posters across 5 continents. Critics called him a master. His recordings topped classical music charts. Tonight's performance in Chicago had sold out in less than 3 hours. As the applause finally began to fade, Victor walked off stage with measured steps. His posture perfect, his expression one of practiced humility. But inside, satisfaction pulsed through him. Every note had been flawless. Every crescendo had landed exactly where it should. He'd played Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto without a single mistake. One of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. Backstage, the venue manager was waiting with a bottle of sparkling water and a towel. Magnificent, Mr. Ashford. Absolutely magnificent. The audience loved every second. Victor accepted the water with a nod. The acoustics in this hall are exceptional. It makes the work easier. Still, your talent is extraordinary. We're honored to have you here. The manager glanced at his watch. The VIP reception will begin in about 20 minutes. Will you need anything before then? Just a few moments of quiet, Victor replied, waving him away. He preferred these minutes after a performance, when the adrenaline was still high but the demands of socializing hadn't yet begun. He was wiping his hands with the towel when he heard voices coming from the hallway that led to the stage. One voice was young, female, and trembling with emotion. The other belonged to someone trying to sound firm but patient. Curious despite himself, Victor moved toward the sound. As he rounded the corner, he saw a small group gathered near the stage entrance. The venue manager was there, along with 2 security guards. And in front of them stood a girl, perhaps 16 years old, with a white cane in one hand and the other reaching out as if trying to sense what was in front of her. Dark glasses covered her eyes. Next to her stood a woman in her 40s, dressed in clothes that had clearly been chosen with care but showed their age. The woman's hand rested protectively on the girl's shoulder. "Please," the girl was saying, and Victor could hear the desperation in her voice. "I've been practicing for years. I just want one chance. Just one moment to feel what it's like to play on a real concert piano. I've never had the opportunity before." The venue manager shook his head, though the girl couldn't see the gesture. "Miss, I understand your enthusiasm, but this piano is worth more than most people's houses. It's not something we can let anyone just walk up and play. There are insurance concerns, safety protocols." "I'm very sorry, but I have to say no. I'll be careful, I promise. I won't damage anything. The girl's voice cracked slightly. "I've dreamed about this for so long. Please." Her mother spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. "We came all the way from the South Side just for tonight. Elena saved for 8 months to buy tickets. She's listened to Mr. Ashford's recordings every single day for 3 years. All she wanted was to see the piano up close, and when we got here, she asked if there was any way, any possibility." "I'm truly sorry," the manager said, and he did sound genuinely apologetic. "But my hands are tied. The piano belongs to the hall, and we have strict policies." Victor stepped forward, his footsteps echoing slightly on the polished floor. The group turned toward him, and the girl's head snapped in his direction. "Mr. Ashford?" Her face transformed, lighting up with an expression of pure joy mixed with disbelief. "Is that really you?" "I can't believe it. I'm Elena. I'm your biggest fan. I've listened to every single recording you've ever made. Every single one. I have them all on my phone, and I play them over and over. Tonight was like a dream. The way you played the Rachmaninoff, it was perfect. Every note was exactly where it should be." She was speaking rapidly now, the words tumbling out. "I was hoping, and I know it's probably impossible, but I was hoping I might be able to play something. Just for a moment. Just to know what it feels like to touch a piano like that. I know I'm not at your level, nobody is, but I love music more than anything in the world. Playing is everything to me. Victor studied her. He took in the worn shoes that had been polished until they shined. The simple dress that was probably her nicest one. The way her fingers gripped the cane so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The hope radiating from every part of her, a smile began to form on his lips. Not a warm smile. Not a kind smile. Something else entirely. You want to play? He said slowly, letting each word hang in the air. On this piano? On the same piano I just performed on? Elena nodded eagerly, completely missing the tone in his voice. Yes, sir. I mean, I know I'm not nearly as good as you. Nobody is. But I love music so much and I practice every single day and I thought maybe, just maybe. Victor's smile widened. He was aware of the manager watching him, of the security guards shifting uncomfortably, of Elena's mother's expression starting to change as she picked up on something the girl couldn't hear. My dear girl, Victor said, and now there was no mistaking the condescension dripping from every syllable. Do you have any idea what it takes to master the piano? Do you understand the hours of practice, the discipline, the raw natural talent that's required? This isn't about loving music. Children love music. This is about dedication and ability at the highest possible level. Elena's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. I have practiced every day since I was 5 years old. I practice at least 4 hours a day, sometimes more. When I can't see the world around me, music lets me feel it. It lets me understand it. It's how I make sense of everything. How touching, Victor said, his voice dripping with mockery now. Several staff members who had been passing by had stopped to watch. Victor was aware of his growing audience, and something ugly inside him fed on their attention. He gestured dramatically toward the stage, toward the magnificent grand piano sitting under the lights. But you see, that instrument up there represents decades of mastery. It's played by professionals who have sacrificed everything, given up everything, for their art. You think because you've spent some time pecking away at keys in your living room, you're ready for a concert piano? You think passion is enough? The words hung in the air like poison. Elena stood very still, her face beginning to crumble. Her mother's expression had gone from concern to furious. I just wanted to try, Elena whispered, so quietly that Victor almost didn't hear her, but he wasn't finished. Victor turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. More staff members had stopped their work to watch. A few lingering audience members who hadn't yet left the building stood at a distance, curious about what was happening. This was exactly the kind of moment Victor thrived on. An audience, attention, a chance to demonstrate his superiority. This is what's wrong with the world today, he announced, his voice carrying across the space with practiced projection. Everyone thinks they can be an artist. Everyone thinks that wanting something badly enough makes them entitled to it. That passion somehow equals talent. Elena's mother stepped forward, her hand tightening on her daughter's shoulder. That's quite enough. We shouldn't have asked. It was foolish of us. Come on, Elena, let's go. But Elena didn't move. She stood frozen in place, her whole body rigid. Her hands gripped her cane so tightly that Victor could see them shaking. I've worked hard, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I'm not perfect, but I've tried. Every single day I've tried. Victor let out a sharp laugh that echoed through the hallway. The sound was harsh, cutting. Several people in the watching crowd winced at the cruelty of it. Tried? Victor repeated, shaking his head. My dear, trying isn't enough. Do you know how many hours I've spent at the piano? Do you know what I've sacrificed? I started lessons when I was 4 years old. I practiced 6 hours a day as a child. 8 hours as a teenager. I gave up friendships, relationships, normal experiences that other people take for granted. All for this. All to reach the level I'm at now. He took a step closer to Elena, and her mother instinctively moved to shield her daughter. But Victor wasn't done, and you want to know the real truth? He continued, his voice dropping to something that sounded almost confidential, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Even with all that work, even with all that sacrifice, it wouldn't have mattered if I didn't have the natural gift. The raw talent? Some people are born with it. Most people aren't. That's just reality. That's just how the world works. Victor, please, the venue manager said quietly, clearly uncomfortable with where this was going. There's no need. No need for what? Honesty? Victor shot back. This girl needs to understand reality. She needs to hear the truth that nobody else will tell her. He turned back to Elena. You're blind. That's already a massive disadvantage. But beyond that, do you really think you have what it takes to play at this level? Have you ever performed in front of thousands of people? Have you ever had critics analyze every single note you play? Have you ever had the pressure of knowing that one mistake could ruin your entire reputation? Elena's face was crumbling now. Tears were sliding down her cheeks from beneath her dark glasses. Her mother was openly glaring at Victor, fury radiating from every part of her. You have no right, Elena's mother said, her voice shaking with anger. You have no right to speak to her this way. She's 16 years old. She just wanted to touch a piano. That's all. And you're standing here acting like she asked to take your career away from you. Victor turned his attention to the mother now. I'm doing her a favor. I'm saving her years of disappointment and heartbreak. Better she learns now that some dreams are just that, dreams, not reality. One of the security guards shifted uncomfortably. A woman from the cleaning staff who had stopped to watch had her hand over her mouth, looking horrified. But Victor was too caught up in his own performance to notice the reactions around him. Take my advice, he said, directing his words back to Elena. Find a more realistic dream. Maybe you could teach beginners. Maybe you could play at community centers or nursing homes. Nice, simple music for people who aren't really listening anyway. But this? He gestured toward the stage again, toward the grand piano gleaming under the lights. This is for professionals. This is for people who can see the keys, see the music, see the future they're working toward. This requires vision, and I mean that both literally and figuratively. The final words hit Elena like a physical blow. Her whole body seemed to fold inward. The tears were falling freely now, and she wasn't even trying to hide them anymore. You're cruel, her mother said, her voice breaking. You're a cruel, heartless man. Come on, baby. We're leaving. We never should have come here. She tried to guide Elena toward the exit, but Elena's legs seemed to have stopped working. She stood there, trembling, her face a picture of devastation. This had been her dream, her one chance. And it had been crushed not just by rejection, but by mockery. Victor watched them, feeling a surge of satisfaction. He'd made his point. He'd established the hierarchy. He'd reminded everyone in this hallway exactly who he was and what he represented. I hope you're proud of yourself, someone said from the edge of the crowd. Victor turned, ready to put this new challenger in their place too. But the words died in his throat when he saw who had spoken. An elderly woman was making her way through the gathered crowd. She moved slowly, leaning on a carved wooden cane that looked like it was worth more than most people's cars. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant bun. She wore a dark blue dress that was simple but clearly expensive. And her eyes, sharp and bright despite her age, were fixed on Victor with an expression that made his blood run cold. Madame Rousseau, he breathed. The entire atmosphere in the hallway changed in an instant. Several of the staff members who clearly recognized the name straightened up. The venue manager's eyes went wide. Even Elena's mother, who had been pulling her daughter toward the exit, paused. Catherine Rousseau was a legend in the classical music world. She'd been teaching piano for over 50 years. 3 generations of concert pianists had studied under her. She'd performed in some of the greatest concert halls in the world before retiring to focus on teaching. And she had a reputation for being absolutely terrifying. When someone disappointed her, Victor had studied under her for 2 years when he was 15 and 16. Those had been 2 of the most challenging years of his life. She'd pushed him harder than anyone ever had. She'd also been the one to help him get his first major performance opportunity. He owed her more than he could ever repay, and right now, she was looking at him like he was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Madame," Victor started, trying to inject some warmth into his voice. "What a wonderful surprise. I didn't know you were in Chicago. If I'd known you were attending tonight, I would have—" "Be quiet," she said sharply. Victor's mouth snapped shut. Around them, the crowd seemed to be holding its collective breath. Madame Rousseau moved closer, her cane tapping against the floor with each step. When she reached Victor, she looked up at him. Despite being nearly a foot shorter than him, she somehow seemed to tower over him. "I taught you for 2 years," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. 2 years of my life I spent trying to turn you into not just a great pianist, but a great artist. A great human being. And this is what you've become?" Victor felt heat rising in his face. "Madame, I was simply being realistic with the girl. Not everyone has what it takes to. I said be quiet." The command in her voice was absolute. Victor found himself unable to speak, unable to do anything but stand there under her withering gaze. Madame Rousseau turned away from him, dismissing him as completely as if he'd ceased to exist. She walked toward Elena, who was still standing frozen, tears streaming down her face. "Child," Madame Rousseau said, and her voice was completely different now, soft, gentle, kind. "What is your name?" Elena turned toward the sound of Madame Rousseau's voice, her tear-stained face showing confusion mixed with a flicker of hope. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "Elena, ma'am," she said quietly, her voice still shaky. "My name is Elena." "Elena," Madame Rousseau repeated, as if tasting the name. "That's a beautiful name." "It means light? Did you know that?" Elena shook her head, a small movement. "Well, it does, and I think that's fitting." Madame Rousseau reached out and gently took one of Elena's hands in both of hers. Her skin was soft, papery with age, but her grip was firm and warm. "Elena, I heard what you said before, about wanting to play, about loving music. Is that still true? Even after what just happened?" Elena hesitated, glancing in the direction where she knew Victor was standing. Her mother moved closer, protective, uncertain about where this was going. "Yes, ma'am," Elena finally whispered. "I still want to play. I always want to play, even when it hurts. Even when people tell me I can't." Madame Rousseau smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Good, that's the answer of a true musician. Someone who plays not because they want applause or fame, but because they have to, because the music lives inside them and needs to come out." She turned back toward Victor, and the warmth vanished from her expression instantly. Unlike some people who have forgotten why they started playing in the first place. People who think music is about ego and superiority. Victor opened his mouth to respond, but she held up one finger in warning. He closed it again. "I would very much like to hear you play, Elena," Madame Rousseau said, turning back to the girl. "Would you honor me with a performance?" Elena's mother stepped forward, her voice concerned. "Ma'am, that's very kind of you, but we've already been told it's not possible. The piano isn't available for public use, and we don't want to cause any more trouble. We should really just go home." "Nonsense," Madame Rousseau said briskly. She turned to the venue manager, who was watching the entire scene with wide eyes. "The piano is being rented for another hour, is it not?" "Yes, ma'am," the manager said quickly. "For Mr. Ashford's use in case he wanted to practice or, well, Mr. Ashford can spare a few minutes, can't you, Victor?" It wasn't really a question. It was a statement dressed up as a question. Victor felt trapped. Every eye in the hallway was on him. More people had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. If he said no, he would look even worse than he already did. If he said yes, he'd have to stand there and watch this blind girl stumble through some simple piece, probably making mistakes, definitely wasting everyone's time. But this was Madame Rousseau, the woman who had shaped his career, the woman whose recommendation had opened doors for him that would have otherwise remained closed, the woman whose opinion still mattered in the classical music world more than almost anyone else's. "Of course," he said through gritted teeth. "If Madame Rousseau wishes to hear the girl play, then by all means." How generous of you, Madame Rousseau said dryly, making it clear she saw right through him. She turned back to Elena. Come, child. Let me take you to the piano. Elena's mother looked uncertain. Are you sure about this? After everything that just happened, maybe it would be better if we just left. Elena's been through enough tonight. But Elena was already moving forward, her cane tapping against the floor as Madame Rousseau guided her gently toward the stage entrance. There was something different about her now. The devastation was still visible on her face, but underneath it, something else was emerging. Determination, purpose, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. The small crowd followed them, everyone moving toward the stage. The venue manager gestured to one of the staff members to make sure the stage lights were still on. Victor walked behind everyone else, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression dark. When they reached the stage, Madame Rousseau helped Elena up the stairs, guiding her carefully. Elena's mother stayed close, ready to help if needed, but Madame Rousseau seemed to know exactly what she was doing. She'd probably taught hundreds of students over the years, maybe some of them with challenges similar to Elena's. The grand piano sat in the center of the stage, magnificent under the lights. It was a Steinway Model D, the kind of instrument that could cost as much as a house. The kind of piano that most people only ever saw in concert halls or recordings. Elena approached it slowly, her cane sweeping in front of her. When she reached it, she set the cane aside and reached out with both hands. Her fingers found the edge of the piano, then moved along its smooth surface. She was taking her time, almost like she was introducing herself to it. It's beautiful, she whispered, though of course she couldn't see it. But maybe she could sense it somehow. The craftsmanship, the weight of it. The potential contained in those 88 keys. Madame Rousseau helped her onto the bench, adjusting its height slightly. Take a moment, feel where everything is. There's no rush. Elena sat very still. Her hands hovered over the keys without touching them. She seemed to be gathering herself, preparing. The audience that had gathered, now maybe 20 or 30 people, watched in silence. Victor stood off to the side, his jaw clenched. He told himself this was a waste of time, that he should just leave, that he didn't need to stand here and watch this girl play some beginner's piece, probably something by Mozart that every child learned in their first year of lessons. But Madame Rousseau had told him to stay, and he couldn't bring himself to defy her. Elena's fingers finally touched the keys, not pressing them yet, just resting there, feeling the texture, the spacing. Her head tilted slightly to one side, and Victor recognized that gesture. He'd seen it in other musicians. She was listening, not to any external sound, but to something internal, to the music that existed in her mind before it existed in the world. The silence stretched out. One of the staff members shifted their weight, and the small sound seemed loud in the quiet. Elena's mother stood at the edge of the stage, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles were white. Then Elena took a breath. A deep, steady breath. As she began to play, the first note rang out clear and pure. It was a single note, held for a moment, perfect in its simplicity. Victor felt something shift in his chest, though he couldn't have said what. The second note followed, then the third. And suddenly Victor recognized what she was playing. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, not a beginner's piece at all. This was one of the most emotionally complex pieces in the classical repertoire. It required not just technical skill, but deep understanding. The ability to make each note carry meaning and weight. Elena's hands moved across the keyboard, and Victor's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was breathing life into them. Where Victor's performance earlier that evening had been technically perfect, precise exactly as written in the score, Elena's playing was something else entirely. It was alive. Every note seemed to carry its own story, its own emotion. She added subtle variations, tiny changes in tempo and dynamics that weren't written in the music but felt absolutely right. The melody sang out, sweet and melancholic. Elena swayed slightly as she played, her whole body moving with the music. It was like watching someone in a conversation with an invisible partner, responding to something only she could hear. Victor stood frozen. Around him, the staff members were equally still, transfixed. One woman had tears streaming down her face. The venue manager had his hand over his mouth. Even the security guards who had been so ready to escort Elena out earlier were now completely focused on her performance. Madame Rousseau stood with her eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. Nodding gently along with the music, Elena moved into a more complex section where the melody wove between both hands, creating layers of sound. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence. She wasn't thinking about the notes anymore. She had moved beyond that into pure expression. Victor felt something crack inside his chest, something he'd kept locked away for years. He couldn't remember the last time music had affected him this way. The last time he'd listened to someone play and felt it not just in his ears, but in his heart, in his gut, in the very core of his being. This blind 16-year-old girl, playing on a piano she'd never touched before, in front of an audience she couldn't see, was creating something magical, something real. Something that Victor, with all his training and all his technique and all his awards, hadn't managed to create in years. The music filled every corner of the concert hall. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion made tangible, feelings transformed into notes that hung in the air like something you could almost touch. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who couldn't see them. Victor watched her hands, studied the way she navigated the keyboard. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. She knew exactly where every key was, had memorized the geography of the piano so completely that her blindness seemed irrelevant. But it was more than just muscle memory. There was an intimacy in the way she played, like she and the piano were old friends having a conversation. The nocturne built slowly, each phrase flowing into the next. Elena leaned into the more passionate sections, her whole body expressing what her voice couldn't. When the music called for softness, she played with such delicate touch that Victor found himself leaning forward, afraid to miss a single note. When it called for power, her hands commanded the instrument with surprising strength. Janitor who had been emptying trash bins when the music started had stopped working completely. He stood near the back of the small crowd, his cart abandoned, his eyes fixed on the stage. Tears ran down his weathered face and he didn't bother to wipe them away. Victor's arms, which had been crossed defensively over his chest, had slowly dropped to his sides. His hands hung loose now, forgotten. His throat felt tight. When was the last time he'd felt this way? When was the last time music had moved him to the point where his eyes stung with tears he refused to let fall? He tried to remember why he'd started playing piano in the first place. He'd been 4 years old. His mother had taken him to a concert and he'd been mesmerized. Not by the technical perfection, not by the fame or the applause, but by the way the music had made him feel. Like he was flying. Like he could understand things he didn't have words for. Like the world made sense in a way it never had before. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost that. He'd become obsessed with perfection, with technique, with being the best. The music had become secondary to his ego. When had that happened? When had he stopped playing because he loved it and started playing to prove something? Elena moved into the final section of the nocturne where the melody returns, but softer now, more resigned. Her interpretation was heartbreaking. Each note seemed to carry the weight of longing, of beautiful sadness, of acceptance. She understood this piece in a way that went beyond the notes on the page. She felt it. Victor glanced around at the other faces watching. The venue manager was openly crying now, not even trying to hide it. Madame Rousseau had opened her eyes and was watching Elena with an expression of pure joy mixed with something else. Pride, maybe? Or recognition. The look of someone who had just discovered something precious. Elena's mother stood with both hands pressed against her heart, her face a mixture of awe and love and fierce protectiveness. She'd probably heard her daughter play 1,000 times at home on whatever piano they had. But this was different. This was her daughter sharing her gift with the world, and the world was listening. The music grew quieter, more introspective. Elena's touch on the keys became lighter and lighter, each note floating up like a whisper or a prayer. She was approaching the ending now, those final delicate phrases that required perfect control, perfect understanding. Victor held his breath. This was the hardest part, where many pianists rushed or pressed too hard, where the emotion could overwhelm the technique. But Elena navigated it perfectly. Her fingers barely seemed to touch the keys, yet each note rang out clear and true. The final note came. A single key, pressed with such gentle precision that it seemed to hover in the air, reluctant to fade. Elena held it, let it sing, let it slowly dissolve into silence. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence that followed the music felt sacred somehow, like the moment after a prayer. Then Elena lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She sat very still, her head bowed as if she was returning from somewhere far away. The applause started slowly. One person, then another, then suddenly everyone was clapping. Not polite applause, not the dutiful appreciation you give at the end of any performance. This was real, raw, the kind of applause that comes from being genuinely moved. The janitor was clapping so hard, his hands must have hurt. The venue manager was applauding while wiping his eyes with his sleeve. The staff members who had stopped to watch were all on their feet. Even the security guards who had been ready to escort Elena out earlier were clapping enthusiastically. Madame Rousseau applauded too, but slowly, deliberately, with the kind of measured appreciation that somehow carried more weight than the enthusiastic clapping around her. She was smiling, and there were tears on her cheeks that she made no effort to hide. Elena stood up from the piano bench, her movements uncertain now that the music was over. She turned in the general direction of where she knew her mother was standing and gave a small, shy bow. Her face was flushed, glowing with a mixture of joy and relief and something deeper, accomplishment, validation, the knowledge that she had just shared something real and true, and people had received it. Her mother rushed onto the stage and pulled Elena into a fierce embrace. Both of them were crying now, holding each other as the applause continued. Victor stood motionless in the crowd. His hands remained at his sides. He wasn't applauding. He couldn't. He was too busy trying to understand what had just happened, what he had just witnessed. This girl, this 16-year-old blind girl he had mocked and humiliated not 20 minutes ago, had just taught him something he'd forgotten. She'd reminded him what real artistry looked like, what it meant to play not for applause or recognition, but because the music demanded to be shared. His performance earlier that evening had been flawless. Every note exactly right. Every dynamic precisely calculated. It had been perfect, but Elena's performance had been alive. Imperfect in small ways, maybe, but infused with something his playing lacked. Heart, soul, truth. The realization hit him like a physical blow. For years, decades even, he'd been chasing technical perfection. He'd measured success by the absence of mistakes, by the precision of his execution, by the reviews in prestigious publications. He'd become a machine, producing perfect performances that left audiences impressed but not moved. When had he last played something that made someone cry? Not from the beauty of his technique, but from the emotion he'd conveyed. When had he last felt the music the way Elena clearly felt it? Madame Rousseau approached Elena and her mother on the stage. She took both of Elena's hands in hers, and though Victor couldn't hear what she was saying over the continuing applause, he could see the intensity of the conversation. Elena was nodding, her face showing disbelief mixed with hope. Victor's legs felt weak. He wanted to sit down, to process what had just happened. But more than that, he wanted to run. To leave this place and never come back, to escape the shame that was washing over him in waves. He'd been cruel to this girl. Unnecessarily, pointlessly cruel. He tried to crush her dream, to destroy her confidence, to make her feel small so that he could feel big. And she'd responded by creating something beautiful, by showing grace and strength and raw talent that made his own accomplishments feel hollow. The applause finally began to fade. People were talking now, excitedly discussing what they'd just heard. The venue manager was on his phone, probably telling someone about what had just happened. The staff members were gathering in small groups, their faces still showing the impact of Elena's performance. Madame Rousseau helped Elena down from the stage, guiding her carefully. Elena's mother stayed close, one hand on her daughter's shoulder. As they descended the stairs, Madame Rousseau looked directly at Victor. Her expression said everything: disappointment, anger, but also expectation. She was giving him a chance to make this right. The question was whether he would take it. Victor's mouth felt dry. His heart was pounding in his chest. He knew what he needed to do. The words were forming in his mind, difficult and necessary. But saying them would mean admitting he'd been wrong. Admitting that his arrogance had blinded him. Admitting that this girl he'd dismissed and mocked had just taught him something about music that he should have never forgotten. Elena was approaching now, still being guided by Madame Rousseau. She couldn't see Victor standing there, couldn't see the expression on his face. But she would hear his voice when he spoke. If he spoke, the moment stretched out, heavy with possibility and consequence. Everyone in the hallway seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. Conversations quieted. People turned to watch. Victor uncrossed his arms. He took a breath, feeling it shake slightly as it entered his lungs. Victor stepped forward, and the small crowd parted to let him through. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by shame and the realization of what he'd done. Elena turned slightly toward the sound of his footsteps, her expression guarded, uncertain. "Elena," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. She stood very still, waiting. Her mother moved closer to her, protective. Madame Rousseau watched Victor with those sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. Double quotes. Victor paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. He'd given hundreds of interviews in his career, had spoken eloquently about music theory and performance technique, but this was different. This required a different kind of honesty. "I owe you an apology. What I said to you earlier was cruel and arrogant and completely wrong." The hallway was silent. Everyone was listening, but Victor kept his eyes on Elena, even though she couldn't see him watching her. "You have a gift," he continued, and now his voice was stronger, more certain. "A real gift. Not just technical ability, though you clearly have that, but something deeper. Something I've been searching for in my own playing for years and haven't found. You made that piano sing, you made it tell a story. You touched everyone in this room, including me." Elena's expression shifted, confusion mixing with cautious hope. Her mother's protective stance relaxed slightly, though she still watched Victor with wariness. "I've spent 35 years playing piano," Victor said. "I've performed on the greatest stages in the world. I've received standing ovations from thousands of people. And tonight, listening to you play, I realized something." He paused, his throat tight. "I've forgotten why I fell in love with music in the first place. I've become so focused on being perfect, on being the best, on maintaining my reputation, that I lost sight of what really matters." He looked down at his hands. These hands that had played countless concerts, that had mastered some of the most difficult pieces ever written. "You reminded me of something tonight, something important. Music isn't about ego or superiority. It's about connection. It's about truth. It's about sharing something real with people, making them feel something genuine." Elena's face was changing now, the hurt beginning to fade, replaced by something softer. Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. "What you did up there," Victor gestured toward the stage, "that was real artistry. And I was wrong to suggest otherwise. I was wrong to mock you, to belittle your dreams, to act like your blindness somehow made you less capable. If anything, I think it might make you more capable of seeing what really matters in music." Madame Rousseau nodded slightly, approval showing on her face. But she remained silent, letting Victor continue. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Victor said. "What I said was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. And I want to help if you'll let me." Elena tilted her head slightly. "Help?" Victor turned to Madame Rousseau. "You're still teaching, aren't you?" "I am," the old woman said carefully. "Though I only take on students who show exceptional promise and dedication?" "Elena has both," Victor said firmly. "I think we can all agree on that after what we just heard." He turned back to Elena and her mother. "I teach at the Whitmore Conservatory. It's one of the best music schools in the country. I would like to offer Elena a full scholarship to study there. Everything covered. Tuition, room and board, books, everything. Elena's mother gasped. We couldn't possibly accept that. We don't have the means to. Full scholarship means you don't need to pay anything, Victor interrupted gently. And I'll arrange for transportation, accommodations for family visits, whatever you need. I have the connections and resources. Let me use them for something worthwhile. Let me use them to help nurture real talent instead of just promoting my own career. Elena's face showed a mixture of emotions. Joy, disbelief, lingering hurt, hope all warring with each other. Do you really mean it? She asked quietly. This isn't just because you feel guilty? Victor appreciated the directness of the question. I do feel guilty, he admitted. I should feel guilty. But that's not why I'm offering this. I'm offering it because you deserve it. Because the world needs to hear you play. Because it would be a crime to let your talent go undeveloped just because of circumstances beyond your control? He looked at Madame Rousseau again. Would you consider taking her on as a student? I know you're selective about who you teach, but after what we just heard, it would be my honor, Madame Rousseau said, cutting him off. She moved closer to Elena, placing a gentle hand on her arm. I haven't heard raw talent like yours in many years, child. With proper training, with exposure to the right techniques and repertoire, you could become something truly special. Not just a good pianist, a great one. Elena's mother was crying now, her hand over her mouth. I don't know what to say. This is everything Elena has dreamed about. But it seems too good to be true. It's true, Victor said. I'll have my manager draw up the paperwork tomorrow. We can arrange for you to visit the conservatory, see the facilities, meet the other teachers. There's no pressure, no tricks. Just an opportunity for Elena to develop her gift. Elena stood very still for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out her hand in Victor's general direction. He stepped forward and took it gently in both of his. Thank you, she said simply. Even after what happened earlier, thank you. This means everything to me. Victor felt the weight of those words, felt the generosity it took for her to offer gratitude after how he'd treated her. No, he said quietly. Thank you. You gave me a gift tonight, even though you didn't mean to. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place. That's worth more than any scholarship I could ever offer. Madame Rousseau stepped forward, her cane tapping against the floor. This is how it should be, she said, looking between Victor and Elena. This is what music is supposed to do. Bring people together, create understanding, transform us. She turned to Victor, her expression still stern but with a hint of warmth beneath it. You made a terrible mistake tonight. You let your pride and arrogance hurt an innocent girl who only wanted to share her love of music. But you're taking steps to make it right. That matters. What matters more is whether you truly learn from this. Whether you let it change you? Victor nodded, feeling the truth of her words. I will, he promised. I have to. Over the following weeks, arrangements were made. Victor's manager helped Elena's family with all the paperwork. The conservatory welcomed Elena with open arms. Madame Rousseau agreed to give her private lessons 3 times a week. Victor kept his promise. He provided everything Elena needed, but he did it quietly, without fanfare or publicity. This wasn't about making himself look good or repairing his image. It was about doing what was right. He also made changes in his own life. He started playing differently in his concerts. Less focus on technical perfection, more on emotional connection. The critics noticed. Some said his playing had become more mature, more nuanced. Others said he'd gotten sloppy, that he was making uncharacteristic mistakes. Victor didn't care what they said anymore. He was playing for different reasons now? 3 years passed. Elena flourished at the conservatory. Under Madame Rousseau's guidance, her already impressive talent blossomed into something extraordinary. She mastered complex pieces, developed her own interpretive style, and performed in student recitals that left audiences stunned. Then came the invitation. Carnegie Hall, one of the most prestigious venues in the world. Elena had been selected to give her professional debut concert there. At 19 years old, she was being recognized not as a blind pianist, but simply as one of the most promising young talents of her generation. Victor sat in the audience on opening night, in a seat near the back. He'd been offered a place in the VIP section but had declined. Tonight wasn't about him. He just wanted to listen. The lights dimmed. Elena walked onto the stage, guided by an assistant but moving with confidence now. She'd played on stages like this before during her training. She knew what to expect. She sat at the piano. That same moment of stillness before beginning that Victor remembered from that night 3 years ago. Then her hands touched the keys and the music began. It was magnificent. She played Rachmaninoff, the same composer Victor had performed that night in Chicago. But where his performance had been technically perfect but emotionally cold, Elena's was both technically brilliant and deeply moving. She'd grown so much, developed so much, but she'd kept that essential quality that had stunned him the first time he heard her play. That ability to make the music real. To make it matter, the audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. People were crying, shouting their approval, demanding encores. Elena played 2 more pieces, both greeted with equal enthusiasm. Victor stood and applauded harder than anyone else in the hall. Tears streamed freely down his face and he didn't try to hide them. He wasn't crying from guilt or shame anymore. He was crying because the music was beautiful, because Elena had achieved her dream, because sometimes people got second chances to do the right thing. As Elena took her final bow, she turned in the direction where Victor was sitting. She couldn't see him in the crowd, couldn't single out his applause from all the others, but somehow he felt like she knew he was there, like she understood what this